The phone call that would unravel everything came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. I know the exact time because I stared at the glowing digits of my bedside clock as the hospital administrator's voice shattered my world. "Mrs. Davidson, this is St. Mary's Medical Center. Your son Michael has been brought in following a severe cardiac event. You need to come immediately." At 67, I had buried my husband 5 years earlier, weathered countless crises as a retired high school principal, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. Michael, my brilliant, compassionate only child, a successful architect with his own firm, couldn't be dying at just 42. The natural order of life doesn't work that way. I arrived at the hospital still in my nightgown under my coat, silver hair uncombed, hands trembling as I identified myself at the emergency desk. A somber-faced cardiologist led me to a private consultation room, and the words that followed destroyed everything I thought I knew about my future. Massive heart attack. No previous symptoms. Nothing anyone could have done. Already gone. Already gone. My Michael. Gone. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of paperwork and decisions no mother should face. It was nearly 1 p.m. when Victoria, Michael's wife of 8 years, finally arrived. Designer heels clicking against the hospital linoleum, perfectly applied makeup despite the circumstances, her auburn hair styled as if she'd stepped from a salon. "Traffic was absolutely horrible," she offered without meeting my eyes, checking her reflection in her phone screen. "And I had to arrange care for Emma." I had already called Emma's elementary school, spoken with her teacher, and arranged for our 9-year-old granddaughter to spend the day with her best friend's family. The fact that Victoria hadn't thought to handle this herself, that she'd left their child without information about her father's condition, was sadly typical of the woman my son had married. "Michael is gone," I said simply, watching for the reaction that would tell me how to respond. Victoria's perfectly glossed lips formed a small O of surprise. Her manicured hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture that might have seemed natural if I hadn't spent years observing my daughter-in-law's calculated performances. "But he seemed fine yesterday," Victoria said, her voice catching appropriately. "We had dinner together, and then he went to his home office to work on the Henderson project. I went to bed early. I didn't even say goodnight." For a moment, genuine regret seemed to flash across her face, quickly replaced by something I couldn't quite identify: assessment, calculation. Whatever emotion had surfaced was rapidly masked by a more suitable expression of shock. As the day progressed, I watched Victoria make hushed phone calls, stepping away whenever hospital staff approached with questions about funeral arrangements. When decisions needed to be made about Michael's remains, Victoria deferred to me with a casualness that seemed oddly detached. "You knew him longer than anyone, Margaret. You should decide what he would have wanted." By evening, as we waited for Michael's body to be released to the funeral home, Robert Sterling arrived. Michael's closest friend since college and his business attorney. His genuine grief was apparent in his red-rimmed eyes and the tight embrace he gave me. "I can't believe he's gone," Robert whispered. "I just had lunch with him last Thursday." He seemed so energetic, talking about Emma's upcoming school play. I nodded, unable to form words through my grief. Robert turned to Victoria, offering condolences that were met with a practiced, somber nod. "We'll need to meet soon," Robert said, his professional tone returning slightly. "There are matters in Michael's will that require immediate attention." Victoria straightened at this, dabbing at eyes that remained suspiciously dry behind her designer sunglasses. "Of course. Perhaps tomorrow afternoon. I'd like to get things settled quickly, for Emma's sake." The mention of my granddaughter pierced through my fog of grief. Emma, sweet and artistic like her father, who had lost her dad and whose mother was already thinking about settling things quickly. "Emma should be told in person," I said firmly. "I'll come with you to pick her up." "That's not necessary," Victoria replied quickly. I can handle my own daughter." The slight emphasis on "my" wasn't lost on me. It was a familiar dynamic. Victoria asserting control over Emma when it suited her narrative as devoted mother, while delegating actual parenting to Michael, and increasingly to me. "Of course she adores you," Victoria added, her tone softening artificially. "She'll need her grandmother more than ever now." The manipulation was transparent. After 35 years in education, I'd seen enough human behavior to recognize what she was doing. Victoria was already positioning herself, ensuring I would remain available for childcare while establishing clear boundaries of authority. As we left the hospital, I caught sight of Victoria checking her reflection in a window, adjusting her hair before pulling out her phone to make another call. In that unguarded moment, with no audience to perform for, her face showed neither grief nor shock, only cool assessment, like someone calculating their next move in a complex game. I turned away, my heart breaking anew. Not only had I lost my beloved son, but it appeared my granddaughter was in the hands of a woman who viewed his death as an inconvenience at best, an opportunity at worst. What I couldn't know then was that Michael had foreseen this very scenario and had taken extraordinary measures to protect both Emma and me from the woman he had finally recognized as a threat to us both. In the coming days, as I struggled through the fog of grief to arrange my son's funeral, I would begin to uncover the breadth of Michael's foresight and the depth of Victoria's deception. But that night, as I returned to my empty house alone, I could only clutch my son's childhood photo to my chest and wonder how I would find the strength to face the days ahead. For Emma, I told myself, I must be strong for Emma. Something in Victoria's behavior had triggered every protective instinct I possessed. My granddaughter had lost her father. I was determined she wouldn't lose her grandmother too, not when I suspected she would need me more than ever. Chapter 2. The Performance. I've attended enough funerals in my 67 years to recognize authentic grief. It manifests differently in each person. Some collapse inward, some rage, some grow eerily calm. But there's a genuineness that cannot be fabricated. As I sat in the front pew of Sacred Heart Methodist Church, watching people approach my son's casket, I observed a masterclass in emotional performance from my daughter-in-law. Victoria had dressed impeccably in a designer black dress that managed to be both appropriate and flattering. Her auburn hair was styled in elegant waves, her makeup subtle yet flawless, clearly waterproof mascara as she dabbed occasionally at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She leaned against me at calculated intervals, murmuring things like, "He would have loved such a turnout," and "Michael always spoke so fondly of everyone here." To observers, we appeared as a united front of grief, the devastated widow and the heartbroken mother supporting each other through unimaginable loss. Only I could feel how lightly she rested against my shoulder, ready to straighten the moment someone important approached. Only I noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the room, assessing each mourner's social and financial status. Only I caught the subtle changes in her voice when speaking to Michael's wealthier clients versus his childhood friends. But my attention was primarily focused on Emma, seated on my other side, her small body occasionally shaking with silent sobs. Unlike her mother, my granddaughter's grief was raw and real, her face blotchy from genuine tears. I kept my arm around her, offering tissues and quiet comfort as she stared at the casket containing her father. "Is Daddy really in there?" she whispered during a lull in the service. "His body is," I explained gently, "but the special part that made him your daddy, his love, his thoughts, his spirit, that's still with you always." Emma nodded, seeming to understand this distinction better than many adults. "I can still feel him sometimes, like he's watching." "I believe he is," I said, fighting back fresh tears. Victoria leaned across me. "Emma, sit up straight. People are watching." I felt my granddaughter's small shoulders stiffen under my arm. This concern with appearances rather than her daughter's emotional state was precisely why Michael had been increasingly leaving Emma in my care over the past year. After the service, the procession of mourners offering condolences seemed endless. Michael had been well loved by colleagues at his architecture firm, by clients whose dreams he had helped build, by neighbors and friends. Each person had a story about his kindness, his integrity, his quiet humor. "Your son designed our dream home," one woman told me, clasping my hands. "When we ran into financial difficulties during construction, he restructured his fees and connected us with contractors who worked within our budget. He cared more about our happiness than his profit margin. Michael was the only architect who would take on our community center project when the budget was so tight," an elderly man said. He believed every neighborhood deserved beautiful spaces, not just the wealthy ones. These testimonials were bittersweet balm to my aching heart. My son had lived his values, had made a difference. I stored each story carefully in my memory, knowing Emma would treasure them someday. Throughout the reception, I noticed Victoria having intense whispered conversations with several people, including a tall, expensively dressed man I didn't recognize. When I approached, they separated smoothly, Victoria introducing him as Christopher Walsh, one of Michael's real estate investment partners. "My condolences, Mrs. Davidson," he said, his handshake brief and impersonal. Michael was a remarkable man. Something in his tone rang false, and the way Victoria's hand briefly touched his arm suggested a familiarity beyond business acquaintance. I filed this observation away, my educator's brain automatically cataloging behavioral details even through my grief. By evening's end, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. Emma had fallen asleep on a couch in the funeral home's private room, emotionally spent. As I arranged her cardigan over her like a blanket, Robert Sterling approached quietly. "Margaret, could we speak privately for a moment?" I followed him to a secluded corner away from lingering mourners. "Michael left explicit instructions about certain matters," Robert said, keeping his voice low. "I can't go into details yet, but he asked me to tell you something immediately. Trust your instincts about Emma. Does that make sense to you?" I glanced toward my sleeping granddaughter, then at Victoria, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror while nodding absently at condolences. "Yes," I said slowly. "I believe it does." "Good. We'll need to meet officially tomorrow about the will. But Margaret—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Arrangements have been made for both of you." Before I could ask more questions, Victoria approached, her social smile firmly in place. "Robert, I hope we can resolve everything quickly," she said. "I'm thinking of taking Emma away for a while after this. A healing trip. It would be best to handle the estate matters promptly." "Of course," Robert replied neutrally. "My office tomorrow at 2 p.m. As we prepared to leave, I gathered Emma into my arms, her slight weight a precious burden. Victoria made no move to help, instead scrolling through her phone. 18 missed calls. She sighed. So many arrangements to make. I studied her composed face, noting the absence of grief's telltale signs. No swollen eyes, no exhaustion of spirit, none of the physical manifestations of heartbreak that were currently crushing me from within. "What arrangements?" I asked carefully, keeping my tone curious rather than accusatory. "Life goes on, Margaret," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Bills, accounts, notifications. Michael handled everything. Now it's all on me, not us. Not we'll figure it out together for Emma." The solitary me spoke volumes. As I settled Emma into my car, Victoria announced she needed to give herself space to process and asked if I would keep Emma overnight. I felt a strange sense of foreboding mixed with something else. Something that felt almost like my son's presence urging me to stay vigilant, to watch carefully, to protect what he could no longer protect himself. "We're going to be okay, Emma," I whispered to my sleeping granddaughter. "Somehow, we're going to be okay." I didn't yet know how prophetic or how challenging that promise would prove to be. Chapter 3. The Will. Michael left everything to me. Victoria's perfect composure slipped for the first time as she sat in Robert Sterling's office the day after the funeral. I watched her face cycle through emotions, first smug satisfaction, then confusion, and finally barely contained outrage as Robert continued reading the will's provisions. Not exactly, Robert corrected, his professional tone unchanged. Mr. Davidson left you the Lake House property, his investment portfolio with Harrison and Associates, and a life insurance policy of $750,000. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, as Robert outlined the inheritance that had left Victoria increasingly agitated. While substantial by most standards, nearly $1.2 million in total, it clearly fell short of her expectations. The family home at 1247 Maple Grove Drive, both vehicles and his primary bank accounts at First National are bequeathed to his mother, Margaret Davidson, Robert continued, not meeting either of our eyes as he read directly from the document. That's impossible, Victoria interrupted, her carefully manicured nails digging into the leather armrests. We purchased that house together. It's our marital property. Robert slid a document across the desk. The house was purchased solely in Michael's name before your marriage. It was never converted to joint property. The deed and mortgage documents confirm this. I kept my expression neutral despite my own shock. Michael had never mentioned any of these arrangements to me. The family home, a beautiful Tudor with 4 bedrooms and a backyard where Emma had her art studio, was apparently mine, not Victoria's. So were Michael's BMW sedan and Jeep Cherokee, along with bank accounts I hadn't known existed. What about Emma's college fund? Victoria demanded, her voice rising slightly. Michael always said he was setting aside money for Emma's education. Robert nodded. Mr. Davidson established a trust for Emma's educational expenses. You are not the trustee of this account. Then who is? Victoria's question came out as nearly a hiss. Robert glanced at me briefly. Margaret has been named trustee of all funds related to Emma's care and education. The room fell silent as Victoria processed this information. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, totaling assets, weighing options, formulating responses. This makes no sense, she finally said, her voice deliberately modulated to convey wounded confusion rather than the anger I could see simmering beneath. Michael and I discussed our estate plans. This is nothing like what we agreed upon. The will was updated 4 months ago, Robert said. Michael came to me specifically to make these changes. Everything is legally executed and witnessed 4 months ago. Victoria's eyes narrowed. He never mentioned any changes to me. That was his prerogative, Robert replied simply. I remained silent, absorbing the implications of what I was hearing. 4 months ago, Michael had secretly revised his will to ensure I would have the family home and financial resources while limiting Victoria's access to certain assets. The timing corresponded with a period when Michael had seemed particularly troubled, often bringing Emma to stay with me for daddy-daughter weekends that I suspected were actually meant to give Michael space to deal with marital issues. There must be some mistake, Victoria said, turning to me with a practiced look of appeal. Margaret, you know Michael would have wanted his family to remain in their home. You have your own house. Surely you don't intend to take away Emma's childhood home. The subtle manipulation was impressive, framing any enforcement of Michael's wishes as me taking something from my granddaughter rather than from her. I recognized the tactic, but chose not to confront it directly. I'm as surprised as you are, Victoria, I said truthfully. I need time to process all of this. Robert continued with additional details, items about personal effects, specific bequests to charities, funeral expenses that had been prearranged. Throughout it all, I noticed Victoria texting under the table, her face a mask of appropriate grief occasionally disrupted by flashes of calculation. When the meeting concluded, Robert asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once Victoria had left with a tight-lipped promise to discuss this situation soon, he closed his office door and sat across from me. "There's more," he said quietly. "Michael left this for you with instructions to give it to you privately after the initial reading." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my son's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it. "Should I?" I gestured to the envelope. "Take it home," Robert advised. "Read it when you're alone and ready." "And Margaret?" he added, his professional demeanor softening. Michael knew exactly what he was doing. Trust that. I nodded, slipping the envelope into my purse as I rose to leave. In the lobby, I found Victoria engaged in an intense phone conversation, her back turned to the receptionist's desk. I paused, out of sight, but within earshot. "Completely blindsided me," she was saying, her voice low but furious. "The house, the cars, even access to Emma's education fund." "No, I don't think he suspected anything. Must have been his mother's influence. Of course I'm going to fight it, Christopher. I've put in 8 years with this family. I deserve more than some vacation property and insurance money." I retreated silently, taking the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator where Victoria might see me. My mind was racing with questions, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Michael had anticipated something I was only beginning to understand. Back in my own modest ranch home, with Emma still at school, I finally opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single page of letterhead from Michael's architecture firm. "Mom, if you're reading this, the unthinkable has happened. I'm so sorry to leave you with this burden, but there's no one I trust more. My marriage has been failing for some time. What began as growing apart has evolved into something more concerning. I've discovered things about Victoria that make me fear for Emma's emotional well-being and for your security. I've arranged things to protect you both. The house, cars, and money aren't really for you. They're tools to ensure Emma has one stable, loving parent figure when I'm gone. Victoria will fight this. She'll try to manipulate you. Don't let her know what you know or suspect. Watch and wait. Document everything regarding Emma's care. Robert has the rest of my instructions and evidence I've gathered. He'll help when the time is right. I love you, Mom. You taught me to see people clearly and to plan ahead. I'm counting on those same qualities now to protect my daughter. Michael." I pressed the letter to my chest, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. Even facing his own mortality, Michael had been thinking of protecting his daughter and me. Now I understood my mission clearly. For my son's sake, for Emma's future, I would need to become something I'd never been before, a strategic opponent in what was clearly going to become a battle of wills and manipulation with Victoria. It was time to put my education background, all those years dealing with difficult parents and recognizing behavioral patterns, to its most important use yet. Chapter 4. The game begins. "Grandma, when is Daddy coming back?" Emma's innocent question over breakfast 3 days after the funeral pierced my heart. At 9 years old, she was old enough to understand death conceptually, but still young enough to hope for impossible miracles. "Oh, sweetheart," I said gently, setting down my coffee cup and taking her small hand in mine. "Remember what we talked about?" "Daddy can't come back. His heart stopped working because of the attack." Emma nodded, eyes downcast. "I know, but sometimes I forget when I first wake up. I keep thinking he'll come make pancakes like on Saturday mornings." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I know it's hard. I miss him too, every minute. Would you like me to make pancakes on Saturdays now? "They wouldn't be the same," she mumbled, then quickly added, "but I'd like that anyway." I was staying at Michael's house, my house now according to the will, to help care for Emma while Victoria dealt with important paperwork, as she'd vaguely explained. In reality, I suspected she was meeting with her own attorney to contest Michael's will, but I kept this thought to myself. After dropping Emma at Lincoln Elementary, where her teacher had been wonderfully supportive, I returned to the house to find Victoria, waiting in the kitchen. She'd let herself in with her key, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that conveyed businesslike mourning. "Margaret," she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss arrangements going forward." "Of course," I replied, maintaining the polite, somewhat deferential demeanor I decided to adopt as my strategy. "Would you like some coffee?" She seated herself at the kitchen island, watching as I moved around what was technically now my kitchen. This is all so overwhelming. The paperwork, the accounts, the decisions. "I can only imagine," I murmured sympathetically, playing my role while remembering the angry phone conversation I'd overheard. "How can I help?" Victoria's perfectly made-up face registered brief surprise at my accommodating tone, quickly replaced by calculated warmth. "You're so kind, Margaret. Actually, I've been thinking about what makes the most sense for everyone, especially Emma." "Here it comes," I thought, keeping my expression open and receptive. "This house has so many memories of Michael," she continued, her voice taking on a practiced tremor. "Every room reminds Emma of what she's lost. It might be healthier for her, for both of us, to make a fresh start somewhere else." I nodded thoughtfully while placing a mug of coffee before her. "You're considering moving?" "I found a lovely condo in downtown Charleston, near the Cultural District. Excellent schools nearby, walking distance to the art museum and children's theater." She stirred her coffee deliberately. "The thing is, Margaret, with the way Michael arranged things, I'll need your cooperation." "Oh?" I tilted my head questioningly, as if I hadn't already anticipated this conversation. "The will situation is obviously some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Michael would never have intentionally put me in such a difficult position." Her tone hardened slightly before she caught herself. "I've spoken with an attorney who suggests we could avoid lengthy legal proceedings if you'd simply transfer the house to me, as Michael would have wanted." I widened my eyes, projecting thoughtful consideration rather than the indignation I felt at her attempt to manipulate me using my son's supposed wishes. "I see," I said slowly. "And what does your attorney say about the fact that Michael updated his will only 4 months ago, specifically to make these arrangements?" A flash of irritation crossed her face before her mask of reasonable grief returned. Michael wasn't himself in recent months. He was working too hard, stressed about the new projects. He wasn't thinking clearly about our family's best interests. I nodded as if considering this explanation. "That must have been difficult for you both." "It was," she sighed dramatically, "which is why I believe he would want us to correct this oversight now, for Emma's sake." The invocation of Emma's welfare, her trump card, was deployed exactly as I'd expected. I took a deliberate sip of coffee, giving myself time to formulate my response. "I understand your concern," I said finally, "but making hasty decisions during grief isn't wise. Perhaps we should give ourselves some time to adjust before making major changes." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course you need time, but the condo I found won't be available for long. It would be so much easier for Emma if we could settle things quickly and let her start healing in a new environment." I recognized the sales tactic, creating artificial urgency to force a quick decision. My years dealing with pushy parents hadn't been wasted. "Why don't we ask Emma how she feels about moving?" I suggested mildly. "She might find comfort in staying in the home where she has so many memories of her father." "Children don't always know what's best for them," Victoria countered smoothly. "That's why adults make these decisions. Besides, she's already dealing with enough emotional turmoil." I noted how skillfully she'd positioned herself as the protective parent, while subtly suggesting I would harm Emma by consulting her about her own feelings. Michael's letter rustled in my memory. "She'll try to manipulate you." You're probably right, I conceded, watching relief flash across her features. Let me think about it all for a few days. This has been such a shock. Of course, she agreed, clearly believing she'd made progress. Take the weekend. But Margaret, she added, her voice dropping to a confidential tone, I'm worried about finances with the way things stand. Michael handled everything, and now I'm finding credit card bills, mortgage payments. The mortgage that was now my responsibility, according to the will. But I kept this observation to myself. I'd be happy to help review the household accounts, I offered, seizing the opportunity. Perhaps we could go through everything together. That's not necessary, she said quickly. I just meant that resolving the house situation would help me access the equity we've built for Emma's education and well-being. The education fund that Michael had specifically placed under my control as trustee. I wondered if she realized how transparent her motivations were to someone trained to observe human behavior. Let's talk more next week, I suggested, rising as if our conversation had reassured rather than alarmed me. I should get some rest before picking up Emma from school. After Victoria left, I sat alone in the quiet house, mentally reviewing our interaction. She clearly believed I was a grief-stricken, somewhat passive older woman who could be maneuvered into surrendering what Michael had entrusted to me. For now, I needed her to continue believing exactly that. I picked up my phone and called Robert Sterling. I need to understand exactly what evidence Michael collected, I told him without preamble, and how we can gather more. This is going to be a longer game than I anticipated. Chapter 5. Patterns of Neglect. Grandma, Mom says I have to go with her to Miami this weekend, but I don't want to. Emma's troubled face looked up at me as I tucked her into bed 1 week after Michael's funeral. This was the first I'd heard of any Miami trip, which immediately raised red flags. Miami? I kept my voice casual while my mind raced. That sounds like an adventure. Emma shook her head, clutching her stuffed elephant tighter. She says her friend Christopher has a yacht and will stay at a fancy hotel, but I have my book report due Monday and Daddy always helped with my reports. I smoothed her hair gently. Have you told your mom about the book report? She said I can skip it, that teachers understand when your dad dies. Her voice caught on the word. But Daddy wouldn't want me to skip it. He always said commitments are important. Your father was right about that, I agreed, making a mental note of this conversation. Let me talk to your mom tomorrow. Maybe we can work something out. After Emma fell asleep, I called Robert Sterling at his home number, which he'd provided for urgent matters. Miami? Robert's voice sharpened when I explained the situation. With Christopher Walsh? You know him? I asked, surprised. He's the real estate developer I mentioned in our meeting yesterday, the one Michael had concerns about. Robert's tone was carefully measured. Margaret, did you install the home monitoring system I recommended? Yes, the technician finished today. Cameras in the common areas and a security system that sends alerts to my phone. I'd followed Robert's advice to improve home security, though the underlying purpose was different than what a grieving family might normally install. Good. That recording capability may prove valuable. He paused. I'm sending you some materials from Michael's private file tomorrow by courier. Don't open the package where anyone might see you. The next morning, after taking Emma to school, I received a sealed manila envelope. Inside were printouts of text messages between Victoria and someone saved in her phone as CW, dated from various points over the past 10 months. Michael had apparently gained access to her phone records through means I chose not to question, given his thorough nature. The messages painted a damning picture, an affair that had begun almost a year ago, plans made and broken, complaints about Michael working late, about feeling trapped in her marriage, references to Emma as the complication in their relationship plans. Most disturbing were exchanges from just 3 months ago. CW, how long are we going to keep this up? You said you were ready to leave. Victoria, patience. M's name is on everything important. Need to get financials in better position first. Working on it. CW. The Cayman property isn't going to wait forever. Perfect opportunity for fresh start. Victoria. Trust me, few more months max. Everything will fall into place. I sat back, hands shaking slightly. These weren't just messages documenting an affair. They revealed Victoria had been planning to leave Michael, but wanted to secure financial assets first. Had Michael discovered these messages and changed his will in response? Is that why Victoria had been so shocked by the provisions? Another document in the package was a private investigator's report Michael had commissioned, containing photographs of Victoria and Christopher Walsh entering hotels together, expense reports showing gifts he'd purchased for her, and background information on Walsh's business dealings, some of which appeared ethically questionable. The final item was a handwritten note from Michael to Robert, dated just 2 weeks before his death. Robert. Enclosed is everything I've gathered. Not sure what my next steps should be. Confronting her could jeopardize my access to Emma if things go badly. Need to protect her above all. We'll need to meet next Thursday to discuss options. Michael had died on Tuesday. The meeting never happened. Armed with this knowledge, I approached my conversation with Victoria about the Miami trip strategically. I waited until she came to pick up Emma's weekend bag that Friday afternoon. Emma mentioned you're planning a trip to Miami? I kept my tone light, curious rather than confrontational. Just a quick weekend getaway, Victoria replied, checking her expensive watch. Good for her to have a distraction. She's worried about missing her book report deadline, I mentioned casually. You know how Michael always emphasized academics. Victoria's smile tightened. A weekend off won't hurt her GPA, Margaret. The school counselor actually recommended new experiences to process grief. I nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense, though I wonder if a yacht trip with Christopher might be a bit much so soon after losing her father. Emma seems anxious about it. Her eyes narrowed slightly at my mention of Christopher's name. Emma will be fine. Children are adaptable. They certainly are, I agreed, though sometimes they need familiar routines during trauma. I'd be happy to keep her here to finish her project if that would help your plans. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing the freedom of a child-free weekend against her need to maintain the appearance of devoted motherhood. That's thoughtful, but unnecessary, she said finally. This trip is about mother-daughter bonding. Of course, I conceded, then added innocently, Oh, I've been meaning to ask, do you know the password to Michael's home computer? Emma was hoping to find some photos for a memory book her counselor suggested. I don't keep track of Michael's passwords, she said dismissively. Have Robert check his office files. Another note from my growing mental catalog. Victoria claimed not to know Michael's passwords, information that most spouses would share. I'd already found his password notebook in his desk drawer, but her response was telling. One more thing, I said as she turned to leave. Emma's teacher wants parent volunteers for their field trip to the Science Museum next Wednesday. Since I'm not officially a parent, I thought you might want to sign up. Children who've lost parents apparently find these outings especially difficult. It was a test, one I suspected she would fail. Wednesday? I have an all-day spa appointment. I've been waiting weeks for it. Mental health care, she added with a performative sigh. You understand? Of course, I said sympathetically. Self-care is important during grief. I'll explain to Emma's teacher. After she left with a promise to return Sunday evening with Emma, I immediately called Robert. She's taking Emma to Miami with Christopher Walsh, I reported. I need to document this trip carefully. Already on it, Robert assured me. I've engaged the same investigator Michael used. We'll have photographs of everything. Miami is actually helpful for our purposes. It shows her priorities clearly. And if Emma is upset by the trip? I couldn't keep the worry from my voice. Document her emotional state when she returns. Have her talk to her counselor about it. Every reaction becomes evidence, Margaret. I hated viewing my granddaughter's pain as evidence, but I understood the necessity. Building a case for Emma's well-being meant carefully cataloging everything that threatened it. As I prepared for a weekend alone in Michael's house, my house, I thought about the theater production unfolding around us all. Victoria playing the grieving widow while planning escapes with her lover. Me playing the supportive mother-in-law while gathering ammunition. Even Emma unconsciously providing crucial insights through her innocent comments and reactions. The only person not performing was Michael, whose absence remained the most powerful presence in our lives. I touched the framed photo of him on the mantel. "I'm watching, Michael," I whispered, "just like you asked me to, and I'm learning more than Victoria realizes." Chapter 6, The Miami Revelation. Emma returned from Miami with sunburned shoulders, a stomach ache from too much rich food, and emotional withdrawal that broke my heart. She trudged into the house Sunday evening, hours later than Victoria had promised to bring her back, her small face tight with exhaustion. "How was your trip, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling to her level as Victoria texted rapidly on her phone behind her. Emma shrugged, eyes downcast. "The boat made me seasick." "She's being dramatic," Victoria interjected without looking up from her screen. "It was just a little motion sickness." The resort was 5-star. The weather was perfect. She had a wonderful time. Emma's expression told a different story, but she remained silent, casting a quick glance at her mother before mumbling, "Can I go to my room?" "Of course," I said gently. "I'll bring up some ginger tea for your tummy in a few minutes." As she trudged upstairs, I noticed she wasn't carrying her backpack. Did Emma forget her school bag? Victoria waved dismissively. "It got soaked on the boat." "Nothing important in it." "Her book report materials were in that bag," I pointed out, carefully keeping accusation from my tone. "She can get an extension." "I'll write a note." She finally looked up from her phone, her expression daring me to challenge her. "Christopher sends his regards, by the way." "He was disappointed you couldn't join us." The brazen mention of her lover made my stomach clench, but I maintained my facade of oblivious politeness. How thoughtful. "I hope you enjoyed your weekend." "Very much," she replied, a hint of triumph in her smile. "Christopher has wonderful connections in Miami. We're considering investment opportunities there." "How nice," I murmured, making a mental note of this casual admission of future plans. I should check on Emma. Upstairs, I found my granddaughter sitting on her bed, staring at a photo of Michael on her nightstand. The room was exactly as she'd left it Friday. Homework still spread across her desk, work she clearly hadn't touched all weekend. "Want to tell me about the trip?" I asked gently, sitting beside her. Her lower lip trembled. Mom was on her phone the whole time. She and Christopher talked about boring grown-up stuff and left me with the hotel babysitter, even at night. My heart sank. "The whole night?" She nodded miserably. "2 nights. The babysitter fell asleep watching TV, and I got scared because I didn't know where I was when I woke up. I called Mom's room, but she didn't answer." I kept my expression neutral while inwardly seething. That must have been frightening. "Christopher has a big yacht, but he wouldn't let me touch anything. He said, 'Kids mess things up.'" Emma picked at a loose thread on her comforter. "And Mom laughed when he said that, even though Daddy always let me help steer our little sailboat." Each detail was another piece of evidence, another example of Victoria prioritizing her new relationship over her daughter's emotional needs. I made careful mental notes to record later in the journal Robert had suggested I keep. "Did you tell Mom you were scared or upset?" I asked. Emma shook her head. "She was having fun. She told me in the car that it's important for her to be happy again and I shouldn't make things harder by complaining. The manipulation, making a 9-year-old responsible for her mother's happiness, especially one grieving her father, sent a surge of protective anger through me. I pushed it down, focusing instead on comforting Emma. "It's okay to have feelings about things," I told her, pulling her gently against my side, "even when grown-ups are having fun." Your feelings matter too." She leaned into me, her small body relaxing slightly. "Daddy always asked about my feelings." "I know, sweetheart. I know." After getting Emma settled with tea for her stomach and helping her salvage what we could of her book report, I documented the evening's revelations in my journal, adding them to the growing catalog of concerning behaviors. Robert had explained that establishing patterns was crucial. Any single incident could be explained away, but consistent patterns of neglect or poor judgment would build our case. Over the next 2 weeks, those patterns emerged with disturbing clarity. Victoria began staying out late without explanation, leaving Emma with me more frequently. She missed Emma's parent-teacher conference, sending me in her place with a vague excuse about estate meetings. She forgot to refill Emma's inhaler prescription, necessitating an emergency pharmacy run when Emma had a mild asthma attack during art class. Each incident was meticulously documented in my journal. Each one showed a mother increasingly detached from her daughter's daily needs. While I stepped in to fill the void, I was careful not to criticize Victoria directly to Emma, focusing instead on providing the stability and attention she craved. The security system I'd installed captured telling moments. Victoria bringing Christopher to the house late one evening, both slightly intoxicated, unaware that Emma was awake, and witnessed their intimate behavior in the kitchen. Sophia instructing Emma to remember to tell Grandma you had a great time today, after a rushed outing where she'd spent most of the time on business calls. Multiple instances of her promising Emma she'd attend her activities, then canceling at the last minute. My performance as the supportive, somewhat naive mother-in-law continued throughout. I offered to help with Emma's care in ways that seemed generous rather than strategic. I expressed understanding when Victoria claimed grief brain for forgotten commitments. I avoided confrontation when she made thinly veiled comments about moving forward with selling the house. "Margaret, we need to discuss the house situation," she said one evening, 3 weeks after Michael's death. She'd arrived unexpectedly while I was helping Emma with homework, dressed for what was clearly a dinner date rather than a mother-daughter evening. "Of course," I replied amiably. "I've been meaning to ask what items you'd like to keep when I move in permanently next month." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched in surprise. "Move in? I thought we agreed the house should be sold." "Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that," I said mildly. "Actually, I've been thinking it's best for Emma to maintain stability right now." Her therapist mentioned how important familiar environments are during grief. Her expression hardened momentarily before she forced a concerned smile. "I'm worried about you, Margaret. This house is far too large for you to manage alone, and the financial burden, the mortgage, utilities, maintenance." "Michael left the house free and clear," I mentioned casually, watching her reaction. "No mortgage to worry about, and I'm more capable than I look. All those years managing a school district taught me quite a bit about handling complex responsibilities." Something shifted in her assessment of me, a recalculation that I could almost see happening behind her eyes. I'd revealed myself as slightly more formidable than she'd assumed, yet still maintained my helpful, non-threatening demeanor. "We'll discuss it more later," she said finally. "I need to run, important dinner meeting. Emma has already had dinner and she should be in bed by 9. After she left, I sat with Emma at the kitchen table, helping her rebuild the book report whose materials had been lost in Miami. As she carefully glued pieces of her diorama together, she looked up suddenly. "Grandma, are you going to live here now instead of Mom?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" She shrugged, focusing intently on positioning a paper tree at the correct spot in her shoebox forest. "Mom told someone on the phone that you're trying to take the house from her. She said you were being selfish." I chose my words carefully. "Your dad wanted to make sure we all had safe places to live. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about the details, but what matters most is that you're taken care of." "I want you to stay," she said simply. "You help me with homework and remember my medicine and make real food instead of just ordering takeout." Her straightforward assessment of the situation, so innocent yet so perceptive, reinforced my determination. This wasn't just about following Michael's wishes anymore. It was about protecting a child who clearly recognized, even at 9, the difference between performative parenting and genuine care. "I'll do my very best to stay close no matter what," I promised her. It was the only promise I could make with absolute certainty, while the larger battle continued to unfold around us. Chapter 7. The Proposition. I'm thinking of taking Emma to my parents in Arizona for a few weeks. Victoria's announcement over morning coffee nearly a month after Michael's death seemed casual, but the timing set off immediate alarm bells. I had just informed her that Robert Sterling needed to meet with us again regarding additional estate matters. Arizona? I kept my voice neutral while stirring my coffee. That's quite a distance. What about Emma's school? Victoria waved dismissively. She can miss a few weeks. Children are resilient. Children are resilient. Michael's favorite phrase sounded hollow coming from her lips, a convenient excuse rather than a thoughtful observation. "When were you thinking of going?" I asked, mentally calculating how this might align with the increasingly urgent timeline Robert had mentioned. "Next week, ideally." She checked her expensive watch. "My parents have been begging to see her, and frankly, I could use the support system. Being a sudden single mother is overwhelming." I bit back the observation that she'd been essentially a single mother by choice for months, given how often she delegated Emma's care to Michael and me, even before the affair began. "That's understandable," I said instead, "though I wonder if such a big trip might be difficult for Emma right now." She's just getting back into her school routine, and her grief counselor mentioned consistency is important. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you suggesting I don't know what's best for my own daughter?" "Not at all," I backpedaled, maintaining my non-threatening persona. "Just thinking out loud. I'm sure you've considered everything carefully." "I have." Her tone softened, becoming almost conspiratorial. "Actually, Margaret, I wanted to discuss something important with you. Could we have dinner tonight? Just the two of us? I'll have my assistant watch Emma." I raised an eyebrow. "Your assistant?" "Christopher's assistant," she corrected smoothly. "Melissa is wonderful with children. She's helped with Emma before." Another detail from my journal. Victoria was leaving Emma with her lover's assistant rather than with her grandmother who lived 20 minutes away. I made a mental note to ask Emma about these previous occasions. "I'd be happy to watch her," I offered. "But dinner sounds lovely. What did you want to discuss?" "Everything," she said vaguely. "The house, Emma's future, how we move forward from here. I think I've come up with a solution that works for everyone." Her confident smile suggested she believed she'd formulated an irresistible proposal. I agreed to meet at an upscale restaurant downtown at 7, curious what strategies she'd devised. The restaurant she'd chosen was deliberately impressive, the kind with minimalist decor, tiny portions, and prices that made you wince. Victoria was already seated when I arrived, looking elegant in a designer dress that somehow managed to suggest tasteful mourning while remaining fashionable. "Margaret, thank you for coming," she greeted me, air kissing my cheek. "I ordered us a bottle of Veuve Clicquot." "Michael always said it was your favorite." It wasn't. Michael knew perfectly well I preferred a simple Chardonnay, but the manufactured intimacy was part of her performance. "How thoughtful," I murmured, settling into my chair, though I rarely indulged even before Michael's passing. She poured champagne anyway, raising her glass in a toast to new beginnings and solutions. I sipped politely, waiting as she established the atmosphere she wanted. Convivial, generous, warmly intimate. The manipulation was textbook. Create a pleasing environment. Establish rapport. Suggest shared understanding before making your pitch. "Margaret," she began after our appetizers arrived, "these past weeks have been so difficult for all of us. Losing Michael, trying to help Emma cope, dealing with all the practical matters." I nodded encouragingly, playing my role. I've been thinking about what truly matters, she continued, her voice taking on a practiced sincerity. Family, security, peace of mind, and I think I've found a way for all of us to have what we need. I'm listening, I said, cutting a small piece of my overpriced scallop. You and I both know Michael's will has created complications. She delicately sipped her champagne. The house, the vehicles, the accounts. It's all rather awkward, isn't it? Not at all what Michael would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly. I remained silent, letting her continue her pitch uninterrupted. I've spoken with an excellent estate attorney who specializes in these situations. He believes we could easily contest the will based on Michael's mental state in those final months. The stress he was under, the medications for his heart condition from years ago. It wouldn't be difficult to demonstrate diminished capacity. My heart clenched at how casually she suggested invalidating my son's final wishes, but I kept my expression neutral. I see. But litigation is so unpleasant, she continued smoothly. Creates divisions, drags on for months or even years. Not what Emma needs right now. Absolutely not, I agreed, wondering where this performance was heading. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. So I've come up with a better solution, one that gives us both what we want without any messy legal battles. And what would that be? I asked, genuinely curious about her strategy. You transfer the house and vehicles back to me as Michael's widow, she explained, as if offering a tremendous favor. In exchange, I'll guarantee you can see Emma regularly. Perhaps every other weekend, major holidays. I'll even put it in writing. The breathtaking audacity of her offer, essentially ransoming my own granddaughter, almost made me lose my carefully maintained composure. She was proposing I surrender everything Michael had legally left me in exchange for permission to see Emma, rights I already had as her grandmother. That's quite a proposition, I managed, taking another sip of champagne to hide my reaction. I know it's generous, she agreed, misinterpreting my hesitation as consideration. Most women in my position would fight for everything, but I value your relationship with Emma, and frankly, I could use the help occasionally. Occasionally, I echoed, picking up on the telling word choice. Well, single motherhood is demanding, she sighed dramatically, and I do have my career to consider. Plus Christopher and I. She stopped herself, recalculating. That is, I'll eventually want to rebuild my personal life. Having guaranteed childcare arrangements would be tremendously helpful. There it was, the real motivation. Not Emma's well-being, but convenient childcare arrangements that would allow her to pursue her relationship with Christopher unencumbered. What about Emma's trust fund? I asked innocently. Would that remain as Michael arranged it? A flash of irritation crossed her features before she smiled again. That's unnecessarily complicated, too. As her mother, I should have control over her educational expenses. Children's needs change, require flexibility. They certainly do, I agreed, thinking of all the ways Emma's needs had been ignored in recent weeks. So, she said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a folded document, I took the liberty of having my attorney draft a simple agreement. You transfer the assets back where they belong, I guarantee your visitation rights. Clean, simple, everyone wins. She slid the paper across the table with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. I took it, scanning the language that would effectively undo everything Michael had arranged to protect Emma and me. This is quite thorough, I commented, buying time while formulating my response. And what about Arizona? Would Emma and I still have our visits if you move? About that, she said, her expression turning regretful. The Arizona trip might become more permanent. Christopher has development opportunities there. Excellent private schools for Emma. It would be a fresh start for everyone, and conveniently far from me and anyone else who knew Michael or might question her parenting. The pieces of her plan were falling perfectly into place in my understanding. I'll need to think about this, I said, folding the document and placing it in my own purse. Perhaps have Robert review it since he's familiar with Michael's wishes. Her smile tightened. I wouldn't involve Robert. He's rather old-fashioned about these matters. My attorney assures me this is completely standard. I nodded thoughtfully. Even so, such an important decision deserves careful consideration. Michael always taught me not to sign anything without proper review. She couldn't argue with invoking Michael's advice without seeming disrespectful, so she merely smiled and signaled for the check. Of course. Take a few days. But Margaret, she added, her voice taking on a subtle edge, this really is the best solution for everyone. Fighting me on this would only hurt Emma in the long run. The thinly veiled threat hung between us as she paid for our expensive meal with what I suspected was Michael's credit card. I maintained my mask of thoughtful consideration, thanking her for dinner and promising to give her proposal the attention it deserves. As I drove home, my hands finally allowed themselves to shake on the steering wheel. The audacity, the manipulation, the casual way she planned to separate Emma from her remaining connections to Michael. It all confirmed what I'd been documenting for weeks. I called Robert from my car. She's planning to take Emma to Arizona permanently, I said without preamble, and she's offered me a devil's bargain to get the house and accounts. Perfect, Robert replied, surprising me. This is exactly what we needed. Bring the document to my office first thing tomorrow. It's time to move to the next phase. Chapter 8. The Evidence. She actually put it in writing. I can hardly believe it. Robert Sterling shook his head in amazement as he reviewed the document Victoria had given me. We sat in his office early the next morning, coffee growing cold as we dissected her proposition. This is essentially a confession, he continued, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. She's explicitly stating she'll allow you to see Emma only if you transfer assets to her that are legally yours. That's textbook coercion. And this part about Arizona? I pointed to the clause mentioning reasonable visitation regardless of primary residence location. Establishes premeditation for removing Emma from her support system and familiar environment during grief. Robert added another yellow highlight. Combined with the evidence we've gathered of her parenting patterns, this creates a compelling narrative. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. So, what happens now? Robert set down his marker, his expression turning serious. It's time to execute the contingency plan Michael put in place. He hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but he prepared for this exact scenario. From his desk drawer, Robert withdrew a sealed envelope marked Emergency Protocol in Michael's handwriting. My heart constricted at the sight of my son's familiar script. Michael left detailed instructions about when and how to proceed if Victoria's behavior threatened Emma's well-being or attempted to separate her from you. Robert opened the envelope carefully. The key component is a petition for emergency custody modification. Custody modification? I repeated, stunned. Michael wanted me to seek custody of Emma? Temporary custody initially, Robert clarified, based on documented evidence of parental neglect and the child's best interests during grief. Michael believed, and I concur, that a judge would likely award you temporary guardianship, while a more permanent arrangement is determined. My hands trembled slightly. The responsibility Michael had entrusted to me was enormous, not just documenting Victoria's behavior, but potentially taking over Emma's primary care. I'm 67, Robert. Would a court really consider me as a guardian over Emma's mother? Age isn't disqualifying, especially given your demonstrated involvement in her life. And remember, we're not alleging Victoria is an unfit mother in the traditional sense. We're demonstrating that her current priorities and choices are detrimental to Emma's emotional well-being during a critical period of grief and adjustment. Robert laid out the evidence we'd accumulated. My detailed journal documenting Victoria's absences and Emma's reactions, the home security footage showing multiple concerning incidents, statements from Emma's teachers about missed conferences and incomplete homework, notes from her grief counselor about regression and anxiety that coincided with Victoria's increased absences, photographic evidence of the Miami trip with Christopher while Emma was left with hotel staff, and now the damning document proposing to use Emma as leverage. "We'll need one more piece," Robert explained. "A neutral third-party evaluation of Emma's home environment and emotional state. I've arranged for a court-approved child psychologist to interview Emma tomorrow at her school. Standard procedure in these cases. Nothing that would alarm Victoria if she heard about it." The methodical way Michael had prepared for this contingency, right down to identifying appropriate psychological evaluators, broke my heart all over again. How long had he been concerned about Victoria's parenting? How much had he witnessed before deciding such drastic measures might be necessary? "When would we file the petition?" I asked, trying to focus on practical matters rather than my swirling emotions. "Immediately after receiving the psychologist's report, assuming it supports our position. Likely within 48 hours. Robert's expression softened slightly. "Margaret, are you prepared for what comes next? Victoria will not take this lying down. She'll be furious, possibly vindictive." I thought of Emma's small face when she returned from Miami, the way she'd confided that her mother had left her with strangers overnight, how she'd clutched her father's photo while trying not to cry. I thought of Michael, who had foreseen this situation and trusted me to protect his daughter when he no longer could. "I'm prepared," I said firmly. "What's our next step?" "Maintain your current approach with Victoria. Don't let on that anything has changed. If she presses for an answer about her proposition, tell her you're still considering it and have questions about some details." Robert began organizing documents into a legal folder. "Meanwhile, I'll prepare the emergency petition and coordinate with the psychologist." As I left Robert's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Need your answer by tomorrow. Arizona arrangements pending. Important opportunity for Emma's future. The transparent attempt to create artificial urgency only strengthened my resolve." I typed a carefully calibrated response. "Still reviewing. Have some questions about the visitation schedule. Can we discuss tomorrow evening?" Her reply came immediately. "Fine. 7 p.m. at the house. We'll have Christopher's attorney present to answer any concerns." Christopher's attorney, not James's, not a neutral party, not even her own independent counsel. Another telling detail for our documentation. I spent the afternoon with Emma after school, helping with homework and listening as she reluctantly described an incident that morning when Victoria had forgotten to pack her lunch, then berated her for calling to remind her because she was in an important meeting. I recorded these details in my journal immediately after Emma went upstairs to play, noting her dejected posture and the way she'd minimized her mother's reaction, clearly accustomed to managing her emotions rather than expressing her own. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Robert. "The school psychologist met with Emma today during lunch," he informed me without preamble. "Her preliminary findings are significant." Emma demonstrated elevated anxiety when discussing her home environment, particular concern about being sent away to Arizona, and clear attachment to you as her primary source of emotional support. "Is that enough?" I asked, hope rising cautiously. "Combined with our other evidence?" "Yes. I'm filing the emergency petition first thing tomorrow morning. The judge I've requested typically rules on these matters within 24 hours. Should I tell Emma anything?" I worried about preparing her for the potential upheaval. "Not yet," Robert advised. "Children her age struggle with keeping sensitive information private. For now, maintain normal routines. If the judge rules in our favor, we'll have a child specialist help explain the situation to her appropriately." I slept fitfully that night, torn between hope that Emma might be protected from Victoria's neglect and anxiety about the conflict that would inevitably erupt. By morning, my resolve had strengthened. This wasn't about my preferences or even about honoring Michael's wishes anymore. It was about a vulnerable child whose mother was making choices that compounded rather than helped her grief. Robert called at 10:17 a.m. The petition has been filed. Judge Patterson has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Victoria will be served notice this afternoon. So soon? I hadn't expected things to move so quickly. Judge Patterson takes child welfare cases seriously, especially when there's evidence of potential parental flight risk. Victoria's Arizona plans raised red flags. I thought about my scheduled 7 p.m. meeting with Victoria and Christopher's attorney that evening. Should I still meet with Victoria tonight as planned? Absolutely not, Robert said firmly. Once she's served the court papers, you should have no direct contact except through legal representatives. Go to a hotel tonight if necessary. She'll likely be extremely volatile when she realizes what's happening. What about Emma? Worry for my granddaughter overrode all other concerns. The petition includes a provision for Emma to remain in her current home environment with you present until the hearing. The server will explain that to Victoria. Robert paused. Margaret, this is going to get complicated quickly. Are you absolutely certain you're prepared? I thought of Michael's letter, of his trust in me, of Emma's increasingly anxious behavior. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Chapter 9. The Storm. You scheming, manipulative witch. Victoria's voice exploded through my phone hours after she'd been served with the emergency custody petition. I held the device away from my ear, her rage so incandescent it seemed to radiate through the speaker. How dare you try to steal my daughter after everything I've done for you? Her words tumbled out in furious bursts. My attorneys will destroy you. You'll never see Emma again when this is over. Following Robert's advice, I remained silent, letting her fury spend itself without engagement. Eventually, she seemed to register my lack of response. Are you there? Say something, she demanded. On the advice of counsel, I can't discuss this matter directly with you, I finally replied, keeping my voice calm and neutral. I'll see you at the hearing tomorrow. You'll regret this, she hissed before the line went dead. I leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly exhausted. The court server had arrived at precisely 2 p.m., delivering the petition papers to Victoria at her office. Robert had arranged for Emma to be with me after school, sparing her from witnessing her mother's inevitable explosion. Now, as evening approached, I faced the challenge of maintaining normalcy for Emma while preparing for tomorrow's hearing. She sat at the dining room table focused on a social studies worksheet, blissfully unaware of the legal storm gathering around her. "Grandma, can we have spaghetti for dinner?" she asked, looking up from her assignment. "The kind with your special meat sauce?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, grateful for the distraction of ordinary tasks. "Would you like to help me make it?" As we chopped onions and stirred sauce, I studied my granddaughter's face, searching for signs of additional stress. Victoria had called her earlier, her voice tight but controlled, explaining that she had an unexpected work emergency and Emma would stay with me tonight. Emma had accepted this explanation without question, accustomed to her mother's frequent absences. "Mom sounded upset on the phone," she observed suddenly, sprinkling cheese over her portion of spaghetti. "Is she mad at me?" "No, absolutely not," I assured her quickly. "Grown-ups sometimes get frustrated about work things. It has nothing to do with you." She nodded, seeming relieved but not entirely convinced. She said she'd take me to get ice cream tomorrow after school to make up for missing our dinner, but she forgot last time she promised that too. Another small piece of evidence. Broken promises becoming so routine that a 9-year-old had learned to expect disappointment. I added mental notes to my documentation while maintaining an encouraging expression. "Let's enjoy our dinner tonight and we'll see what tomorrow brings," I suggested gently. I couldn't bring myself to make promises about tomorrow when I knew how completely our lives might change after the hearing. After putting Emma to bed with extra stories and reassurance, I called Robert for final preparation. "How's Emma?" he asked immediately. "Managing," I replied, unaware of what's happening, as far as I can tell. Victoria called her briefly but kept her composure. Good. Children are perceptive, but there's no need for her to shoulder adult concerns. Thomas's voice took on its professional tone. For tomorrow, I've prepared a summary document of all evidence for Judge Patterson. The psychological evaluation came back strongly supportive of our position. What should I expect at the hearing? I asked, trying to prepare myself mentally. Judge Patterson runs an efficient courtroom. This is a preliminary emergency hearing, so testimony will be limited. You'll likely be asked about your observations of Emma's well-being and your capacity to provide temporary care. Victoria will have the opportunity to respond to the allegations. Will Emma need to appear? The thought of my granddaughter being questioned in court made my stomach clench. No. Judge Patterson has reviewed the psychologist's report and specifically excluded Emma from this initial hearing. If a full custody investigation proceeds, she may eventually speak with Emma in chambers, but that would be weeks from now. I exhaled in relief. And Christopher Walsh, will he be involved? Legally? No standing. Practically, he's paying for Victoria's high-powered attorney, so his influence will be present. Robert paused. Margaret, prepare yourself. These hearings can get ugly. Victoria's likely strategy will be to paint you as a grief-deranged, controlling mother-in-law trying to steal her child. I understand, I said, though my heart raced at the thought of public accusations. What matters is Emma. Exactly. Focus on that tomorrow. No matter what Victoria or her attorney claim, remember why we're doing this. Sleep proved elusive that night. I checked on Emma repeatedly, watching her peaceful breathing and wondering how tomorrow's decision would affect the rest of her childhood. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolute, dressed in a conservative navy suit that Robert had advised would convey stability and trustworthiness to the court. "Why are you dressed up, Grandma?" Emma asked over breakfast, eyeing my unusual formal attire. "I have an important meeting," I explained, helping her pack her backpack. "Mrs. Wilson from next door will take you to school today, and either Mom or I will pick you up this afternoon." She accepted this with the flexibility of childhood, more concerned about whether her favorite shirt was clean than about the day's unusual arrangements. I hugged her extra tight at Mrs. Wilson's door, wishing I could shield her from the uncertainty ahead. The courthouse was imposingly formal, all marble and echoing hallways. Robert met me at the entrance, his expression professionally composed, but with worry lines visible around his eyes. "Victoria is already inside with her attorney, Gerald Winters from Mitchell and Associates, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the city." I nodded, unsurprised that Christopher had secured top legal representation. And our chances? Judge Patterson is fair but cautious. The evidence is compelling, but temporary custody removal is still an extraordinary remedy. Robert squeezed my arm reassuringly. "Remember, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about ensuring Emma has proper support during a critical time." Inside the courtroom, Victoria sat at a table with a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. She wore a conservative black dress, hair pulled back in a modest style that contrasted sharply with her usual fashionable appearance. The transformation into grieving, devoted widow and mother was complete, down to the framed photo of Michael and Emma she'd placed prominently before her. Her eyes met mine with glacial hatred as I entered, before she quickly adjusted her expression to one of wounded confusion, leaning to whisper something to her attorney. The performance had begun. Judge Patterson, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, entered promptly at 9 a.m. Her no-nonsense demeanor suggested little patience for dramatics as she reviewed the file before her. "This is an emergency hearing regarding temporary custody modification for minor child Emma Davidson," she stated, looking over her reading glasses at both tables. "I've reviewed the petition and supporting documentation. Let's proceed efficiently." For the next hour, Robert presented our case methodically. The the documented patterns of neglect, Victoria's increasing absences, the Miami trip incidents, the psychological evaluation, and finally, the damning proposition document showing Victoria's attempt to use Emma as leverage. Gerald Winters countered with equal efficiency, portraying me as an interfering mother-in-law exploiting a grieving widow's temporary struggles, suggesting my obsessive documentation demonstrated unhealthy fixation, and painting Victoria as a devoted mother temporarily overwhelmed by extraordinary circumstances. Your Honor, Winters concluded smoothly, Mrs. Davidson has kept her granddaughter overnight precisely 19 times since her son's death, at Ms. Jensen's request to help during this adjustment period. This doesn't demonstrate neglect. It shows a mother wisely accepting support while processing her grief. The Arizona opportunity represents a fresh start, not abandonment of support systems. When my turn came to speak directly, I focused on Emma rather than Victoria, describing concrete examples of her anxiety, her academic struggles since Michael's death, and the stability I'd attempted to provide. Your Honor, I said, meeting the judge's evaluating gaze, I'm not seeking to replace Victoria as Emma's mother. I'm asking for temporary measures to ensure her needs are prioritized during an exceptionally vulnerable time in her development. The evidence suggests that currently, other priorities are taking precedence over those needs. Judge Patterson asked pointed questions of both sides, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally, she announced she would review the evidence in chambers and return with her decision in 1 hour. The 60-minute wait in the courthouse hallway seemed eternal. Victoria and her attorney conferred in hushed tones at one end, while Robert and I sat silently at the other. When the bailiff finally called us back, my legs felt leaden as I rose to hear the decision that would determine Emma's immediate future. Judge Patterson wasted no time on preliminaries. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find sufficient cause for emergency intervention in the current custody arrangement, she stated, her voice firm and authoritative. Temporary guardianship of minor child Emma Davidson is hereby granted to Margaret Davidson for a period of 60 days, during which a full evaluation of the family situation will be conducted by court-appointed specialists. I exhaled shakily as she continued outlining the details. Victoria would have supervised visitation 3 times weekly. Neither party could remove Emma from the jurisdiction. A comprehensive family assessment would begin immediately. Across the courtroom, Victoria's composed facade cracked completely, her face contorting with fury as she turned to her attorney, whisper-shouting accusations and demands for appeal. Judge Patterson observed this reaction with a raised eyebrow before adding a final comment. Miss Jensen, your reaction to this temporary ruling concerns me. I strongly advise you to use the coming evaluation period to demonstrate the mature parenting capacity your daughter needs rather than focusing on personal grievances. With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded, "Court adjourned." As we left the courtroom, Victoria blocked our path, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with angry tears. "This isn't over," she hissed, ignoring her attorney's restraining hand on her arm. "You think you've won. You have no idea what's coming." Robert stepped between us. "Miss Jensen, all communication should go through counsel from this point. We'll coordinate Emma's pickup from school today and arrange the first supervised visitation." As Victoria was led away by her increasingly concerned attorney, I leaned against the wall, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over me. I had temporary custody of my granddaughter. Michael's concerns had been validated by a court of law. Emma would be protected, at least for now. "What happens next?" I asked Robert, my voice barely steady. "We pick up Emma from school, explain the situation as gently as possible with the help of her counselor, and begin establishing a stable routine." He touched my shoulder supportively. "The hard part is just beginning, Margaret. But for today at least, Emma is safe." Chapter 10. A new normal. Grandma, is Mom ever coming back? Emma's question pierced my heart as we sat on the porch swing 6 weeks after the emergency custody hearing. Her small legs dangled, not quite reaching the floor as she stared at the driveway where Victoria's car would normally appear for her supervised visits. Visits she had attended only sporadically over the past month and a half. "Your mom is going through a difficult time," I answered carefully, choosing words the family therapist had suggested. "She loves you, but sometimes adults struggle with big changes." Emma nodded with a wisdom beyond her 9 years. "Like when Daddy died and she started staying out late all the time." Her perception sometimes startled me. Children notice so much more than we give them credit for. "Something like that," I agreed, pulling her closer to my side. "How are you feeling about everything?" She considered this seriously, brow furrowed in concentration. "Sad sometimes, but not scared anymore." "Scared?" I prompted gently. "When Mom talked about Arizona, I was scared all the time," she admitted. "I didn't want to leave my school and my friends and you. And I didn't like Christopher. He always talked to me like I was a baby or not there at all." Each of these revelations was carefully noted in my ongoing documentation. The court-appointed evaluator had been meeting with Emma weekly, and with me and Victoria separately. The comprehensive assessment that Judge Patterson had ordered was nearing completion, with the final custody hearing scheduled for next week. The week since gaining temporary guardianship had been both challenging and healing. Emma had initially been confused and upset when we explained the new arrangement, but her counselor had helped frame it as a special time with Grandma, while Mom sorts out grown-up problems. The stability of routine, regular meals, consistent bedtimes, homework help, and predictable expectations had gradually eased her anxiety. Victoria's reaction had been volatile and erratic. She attended the first few supervised visits with obvious resentment, spending much of the time on her phone or asking Emma leading questions about whether she was happy or if I was being mean to her. Then she canceled 2 visits in a row, claiming work emergencies. When she returned, her approach had shifted to bringing expensive gifts and making elaborate promises about future trips and experiences. The most telling visit had been 3 weeks ago, when she arrived with Christopher Walsh unexpectedly in tow, attempting to circumvent the court order specifying who could be present. When the visitation supervisor refused to allow Christopher to join, Victoria had stormed out, leaving Emma in tears, and without the visit she'd been anticipating all week. She hadn't come for the past 2 scheduled visits at all. "Do you think you'll feel ready for the talk with the judge next week?" I asked Emma, referring to the in-chambers conversation Judge Patterson had scheduled. The therapist had been preparing her, explaining that the judge simply wanted to hear her thoughts and feelings, not force her to choose between her mother and grandmother. "I guess so," she replied, kicking her feet rhythmically. "Miss Abernathy said I just have to tell the truth about what makes me feel safe and happy." "That's exactly right," I assured her, though my own stomach nodded at the thought of Emma facing such adult responsibilities. The next day brought an unexpected development. Robert called early in the morning, his usually measured tone edged with urgency. "Margaret, Victoria's attorney, just filed a motion to dismiss the custody case. They're requesting an immediate return to the original arrangement with no restrictions." My hand tightened on the phone. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming the evidence was manufactured, that you manipulated Emma into making statements against her mother, and that Victoria's parenting decisions were reasonable responses to grief." Thomas paused. "Ordinarily, I'd say they have no chance of succeeding. Our documentation is too thorough, the psychological evaluation too clear. But there's a complication." "What kind of complication?" "Christopher Walsh has connections with Judge Blackwell, who's been assigned to hear this motion while Judge Patterson is on medical leave." The implications were clear. Money and influence could potentially override weeks of careful evidence, gathering, and professional evaluations. "What can we do?" I asked, trying to keep panic from my voice. "I'm filing counter motions immediately, But Margaret, there's something else you should know. Our investigator reports that Victoria and Christopher have put deposits on property in the Cayman Islands, a jurisdiction with limited enforcement of U.S. custody orders. The threat crystallized with horrifying clarity. If Victoria regained custody, even temporarily, she could potentially take Emma out of the country to a place where our legal protections would be difficult to enforce. She wouldn't, I began, then stopped myself. Of course she would. Everything I'd learned about Victoria in these weeks confirmed she viewed Emma primarily as an accessory to the life she wanted, not as a vulnerable child with her own needs. I'm implementing additional safeguards, Robert assured me. I've requested an emergency hearing with Judge Patterson upon her return next week. In the meantime, document everything. Any communications from Victoria, any reactions from Emma, anything unusual at all. That evening, as Emma worked on a school project about family traditions, my phone chimed with a text from Victoria. We need to talk privately without lawyers. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Riverside Park. Come alone or deals off. I showed the message to Robert immediately, who advised against meeting her without witnesses. This is exactly the kind of end run around proper channels that concerns me, he warned. Against his advice, I arranged to meet Victoria, but not alone. Robert would be nearby, out of sight but within earshot, and I would record our conversation as permitted by our state's one-party consent laws. The park was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few mothers with toddlers at the distant playground. Victoria sat on a bench overlooking the river, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, her posture rigidly composed. "Thank you for coming," she said as I approached, her tone unexpectedly subdued. "I imagine your attack dog lawyer advised against it. I'm here because any resolution that helps Emma is worth exploring," I replied neutrally, taking a seat beside her but maintaining distance. Victoria was silent for a long moment, watching the river flow past. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. "I'm dropping the custody case." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't among them. "What?" "You heard me." She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes ringed with uncharacteristic fatigue. "I'm signing over full custody to you." No more court battles, no more supervised visits, no more evaluations and judgments. I studied her face, searching for the manipulation behind this sudden capitulation. Why? "Christopher and I are moving to Grand Cayman next month. He's secured development rights for a major resort property." She spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing a change in dinner plans rather than abandoning her child. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime. We'll be there at least 3 years establishing the project." "And Emma?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shrugged slightly. "Emma needs stability, structure, all those things the evaluators keep emphasizing. I can't provide that right now, not with the demands of relocating and launching a major development." The clinical detachment with which she discussed leaving her daughter, her only child who had just lost her father, left me momentarily speechless. "So you're just walking away?" I finally managed. "I prefer to think of it as making the mature, responsible choice." Her tone suggested she expected praise for this decision. "I'm putting Emma's needs first by recognizing you're better positioned to meet them right now." "Right now," I echoed. "For the foreseeable future," she clarified. "I'll send support payments, of course. Make video calls when possible. Perhaps she could visit during school holidays eventually." The casual way she outlined transitioning from mother to distant relative made my heart ache for Emma. Yet beneath my sadness was profound relief. Emma would be spared further custody battles, further disappointments, further insecurity about her future. "What do you want from me?" I asked directly, sensing there must be conditions to this offer. "A clean break," she replied immediately. "No contested hearings, no forensic financial investigations, no further intrusion into my personal affairs. Sign the agreement my lawyer is drafting and Emma stays with you while I start fresh." "And the house?" Michael's accounts? I wasn't concerned about material assets, but I wanted to understand her complete proposition. Keep them, she said with a dismissive wave. Christopher's development will make those look like pocket change. I just want this chapter closed cleanly and quickly. As she outlined the details of her proposed arrangement, I maintained a neutral expression while inwardly marveling at the outcome Michael had somehow foreseen. His careful planning, transferring assets to me, documenting Victoria's behavior, establishing the trust for Emma, had anticipated exactly this scenario. Victoria choosing her own desires over her daughter's needs when forced to face the responsibilities of genuine parenting. 1 week later, I sat in Judge Patterson's chambers as she reviewed the voluntary custody agreement Victoria had signed the day before departing for Grand Cayman with Christopher. "This is an unusual resolution," the judge commented, studying the document carefully. "Miss Jensen is surrendering all parental rights except for limited visitation at your discretion. She believes it's in Emma's best interest while she relocates internationally for an extended period," I explained, using the diplomatic phrasing Robert had suggested. Judge Patterson's expression suggested she wasn't fooled by this characterization, but she nodded slowly. "And you're prepared to assume full legal guardianship of your granddaughter at your age, Mrs. Davidson." "Without hesitation," I replied firmly. "Emma needs stability, love, and connection to her father's memory. I can provide all three." The judge studied me thoughtfully before signing the final orders. Based on all evidence presented throughout these proceedings, as well as Ms. Jensen's voluntary relinquishment, custody of Emma Davidson is hereby granted to Margaret Davidson, with arrangements for support payments and limited visitation as outlined in the agreement. Outside the courthouse, with Emma waiting at home with the kind neighbor who'd helped us throughout this journey, I finally allowed myself to absorb the magnitude of what had happened. I had become, in every meaningful sense, my granddaughter's parent, a role I had never anticipated at 67, but one I embraced with complete commitment. "Michael would be proud," Robert said quietly as we walked to our cars. "He protected Emma the only way he could, by entrusting her to you." Chapter 11, Healing and Growth. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Emma and I planted a memorial garden in the backyard. Michael's favorite flowers and plants, arranged around a small stone bench where we could sit and talk to Dad whenever Emma felt the need. "Do you think Dad knew Mom would leave?" Emma asked as we patted soil around a young rose bush. The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. "I think your father knew that sometimes adults make choices based on what they want rather than what children need," I answered carefully. "And he wanted to make sure you'd always have someone who put you first." Emma nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "I miss Dad every day, but I don't miss how things were after he died, when Mom was always angry or gone." "Your dad made sure you'd be taken care of," I said, pulling her into a gentle hug. "And that's exactly what I intend to do for as long as you need me." That evening, as Emma slept peacefully upstairs, I sat in Michael's study, now a shared space where Emma did homework while I handled household management, and opened the small box of personal items Robert had delivered after the final custody arrangement. Inside was one last letter from my son, marked, "When it's resolved." "Mom, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't. Protected Emma from a situation I saw deteriorating, but couldn't fix in time. I watched Victoria's priorities shift, saw her resentment of family responsibilities grow, noticed her increasing absences. When I discovered her relationship with Christopher, I realized Emma would eventually become collateral damage in her pursuit of the life she really wanted. I'm sorry for the burden I placed on you. Asking a mother to step in as parent again at your age wasn't fair, but I knew you would do it without hesitation. Just as you've always put family first, Emma couldn't ask for a better guardian, a more loving presence, or a stronger advocate. Tell her stories about me, not just the good ones, the real ones, about my mistakes and how I tried to fix them, about how sometimes we see the truth too late, but we do the best we can with the time we have. I love you both more than words can express. Michael. I pressed the letter to my heart, tears flowing freely now that Emma couldn't see. The journey had been harder than I could have imagined. The grief of losing Michael compounded by the battles with Victoria and the challenge of helping Emma heal from multiple traumas. Yet as I looked around the home we now shared permanently, at the evidence of a child growing secure and loved, homework spread across the table, soccer cleats by the door, artwork taped proudly to the refrigerator. I knew Michael had been right to trust me with his most precious legacy. Through his foresight in changing his will, through my careful documentation and strategic patience, through Emma's remarkable resilience, we had created something beautiful from tragedy. A new family constellation, different than what any of us had expected, but solid and true. Some might call it justice, that Victoria had ultimately chosen freedom over motherhood, revealing precisely the character Michael had anticipated. But I preferred to think of it as redemption, the chance to honor my son by raising his child with the values he cherished, ensuring that despite everything, love would have the final word in our story. Chapter 12. 3 years later. Grandma, I got the lead in the school play. Emma burst through the front door, her 12-year-old energy filling the house as she dropped her backpack and thrust a script into my hands. 3 years had transformed the quiet, anxious 9-year-old into a confident, thriving middle schooler whose smile now reached her eyes consistently. That's wonderful. I examined the script, Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Playing Emily Webb is a big responsibility. I'm so proud of you. Mrs. Larson said Dad played George Gibbs when he was in 8th grade. Did you know that? My heart warmed at her casual reference to Michael. We'd worked hard to keep his memory alive through stories, photos, and the small traditions we maintained. Saturday morning pancakes, summer fishing trips to Michael's favorite lake, the memory garden we tended together. I certainly did. I still have the programs somewhere in the attic boxes. Your father was quite the actor in school. I smiled, remembering teenage Michael nervously practicing lines in our living room. He'd be thrilled to see you following in his footsteps. Emma grinned, then her expression turned more serious. Do you think we should tell Mom about the play? The question didn't surprise me. Victoria had essentially vanished from Emma's life after moving to Grand Cayman. Her promised video calls had dwindled to rare, awkward birthday messages and eventually stopped altogether. Emma occasionally still sought connection with her. We can send her an email with the dates, I said carefully. It's entirely up to you. She considered this, then shook her head. Maybe not. She didn't answer when I wrote about winning the science fair, and she's probably still in Thailand with Christopher anyway. Through infrequent updates from Robert, who maintained minimal professional contact with Victoria's attorney regarding support payments, we knew she and Christopher had married and were now developing resort properties in Thailand. The support checks arrived regularly, the one commitment she maintained, but contained no personal notes or inquiries about Emma's well-being. Whatever you decide is fine, I assured her, maintaining the balanced approach our family therapist had recommended, acknowledging Victoria's existence without creating false expectations of her return or involvement. I think just you and the Wilsons and Uncle Robert is enough audience for me, Emma decided, referring to our neighbors who had become like extended family and to Robert Sterling, who had transitioned from Michael's attorney to a cherished uncle figure in Emma's life. As Emma bounded upstairs to start homework, I moved to the kitchen to prepare dinner, pausing to adjust the collection of photos on the refrigerator. Emma winning her karate tournament, building a science project, laughing with friends at her last birthday party, a visual timeline of healing and growth. The journey hadn't always been smooth. The first year after gaining full custody had brought nightmares, academic struggles, and occasional angry outbursts as Emma processed the effective loss of both parents. There had been challenging questions I'd struggled to answer. Why doesn't Mom want to talk to me anymore? Did I do something wrong to make her leave? If Dad hadn't died, would Mom have stayed? With the help of an excellent child psychologist, we'd navigated these painful waters together. I'd learned to validate her feelings without vilifying Victoria, to help her understand that her mother's choices reflected her limitations, not Emma's worthiness. Now, 3 years later, Emma had found her footing. Her grades were excellent, her circle of friends solid, her emotional resilience remarkable for a child who had experienced such significant losses. The house that had once been Michael's, then briefly mine, had truly become ours, filled with evidence of our shared life. Emma's art projects displayed alongside my watercolor attempts, her sports equipment sharing space with my gardening tools, photo albums documenting our camping trips and holiday celebrations. At 70, I had found unexpected vitality in this second round of parenting. The responsibility had given me purpose, while Emma's energy kept me active and engaged. I'd even started dating recently, a kind widower I'd met through the community theater where Emma took acting classes. Nothing serious yet, but a pleasant reminder that life continued to offer surprises at every stage. My phone chimed with a text message from Robert. Court approved the college fund restructuring, all set for Emma's future education, protected exactly as Michael wanted. Another piece of Michael's careful planning falling into place. Despite Victoria's initial attempts to gain control of Emma's educational trust, Michael's foresight had created ironclad protections. Now those funds were secured in a structure that would provide for Emma's college and perhaps even graduate education, regardless of what happened to me in the coming years. As I prepared dinner, I reflected on the strange path that had brought us here, the midnight call that had shattered our world, the gradual revelation of Victoria's true character, the careful strategy that had ultimately protected Emma from becoming collateral damage in her mother's pursuit of a different life. In my darkest moments during those early days after Michael's death, I couldn't have imagined the life Emma and I would build from the ashes of that tragedy. The grief remained, would always remain, but it had been integrated into a new reality filled with meaningful connections and moments of genuine joy. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw our neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, holding a covered dish. "I made too much lasagna again," she announced as I opened the door, her standard excuse for the meals she regularly shared with us. "And Bill wants to know if Emma is still coming to help with the birdhouse project this weekend." "She's been talking about nothing else," I confirmed, accepting the dish gratefully. "Would you and Bill like to join us for dinner? Emma just got some exciting news about the school play." As Mrs. Wilson stepped inside, calling up the stairs to congratulate Emma, who responded with enthusiastic thanks, I felt the quiet satisfaction of community, of the support network we'd built around ourselves that extended beyond biological family. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat in the peaceful quiet of the living room and opened the memory book we'd created during that first difficult year. Photos of Michael at various ages, Emma's childish handwriting describing favorite memories of her father, cards from friends and family offering support during our custody journey. On the final page was a quote from Michael's last letter to me. "Tell her stories about me, not just the good ones, the real ones about my mistakes and how I tried to fix them." I had honored that request, sharing with Emma the full human truth of her father. A good man who had recognized his marriage was failing, who had seen the potential impact on his daughter, who had taken concrete steps to protect his child's future, even while hoping those protections wouldn't be necessary. When Emma had asked why her father had changed his will without telling Victoria, I'd explained as gently as possible. "Your dad saw that your mom was making choices that might not prioritize your needs. He wanted to make sure someone would always put you first, no matter what. It was the truth. simplified for a child's understanding but honest. We had maintained that honesty throughout our journey together, building trust through difficult conversations rather than comfortable evasions. Outside, the garden Michael had loved, and Emma now helped tend, caught the last golden light of evening. The roses he'd planted were blooming again, a reminder that life continues its cycles regardless of our personal losses. Inside, his daughter slept peacefully, surrounded by photos of the father who had loved her enough to ensure her protection even after death. As I closed the memory book and prepared for bed myself, I thought about Michael's extraordinary foresight. He couldn't have known exactly how events would unfold, couldn't have predicted his own untimely death or Victoria's eventual complete departure from Emma's life. Yet he had recognized the essential character of the woman he'd married, had seen the warning signs of her prioritizing personal desires over family responsibilities, and had taken concrete steps to protect what mattered most to him. In doing so, he'd given both Emma and me an unexpected gift. Not just financial security or legal protection, but the opportunity to forge a new family bond that might never have developed otherwise. Through our shared grief and subsequent healing, Emma and I had created something beautiful and enduring. A relationship built on mutual trust, respect, and genuine love that transcended traditional family boundaries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, helping Emma memorize lines for her play, attending my own water aerobics class that kept my joints mobile, coordinating with Robert about long-term financial planning. Ordinary life continuing in its imperfect, precious way. But tonight, in the quiet of the home we had made together, I felt profound gratitude for my son's final gift, the chance to help raise his child, to see Michael's best qualities emerging in Emma, to ensure that despite everything, love and wisdom would be his daughter's true inheritance. Not the legacy any of us would have chosen, perhaps, but one we had transformed through courage and persistence and boundless love into something unexpectedly beautiful. The phone call that shattered everything had led, in the end, to this. A girl growing up secure and loved, carrying her father's memory forward into a bright future, surrounded by people who would always put her first. Michael had foreseen the danger and prepared the shield. I had wielded it when the time came, and Emma, resilient, brilliant Emma, had grown strong in its protection, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the confidence that comes from being truly unconditionally loved. The end.